I believe that one of the most auspicious aspects of Pope Francis' pontificate in relation to the ordination of women is the way in which he has put the fight against clericalism at the forefront of the renewal needed by the Church. Now, there is a specifically theological and spiritual dimension of clericalism which permeates the opposition to the ordination of women not only in documents emanating from Rome, but also in what I would call the spiritual subconscious of most male clergy. The power mechanism underpinning clericalism in the Catholic Church is based on attributes instantaneously bestowed on persons at the very moment in which, through the laying of hands, they are validly ordained. Priests' prerogatives are based on what is commonly referred to as an ontological change. It is commonly believed that this so-called ontological change enables the person to act in persona Christi, in the name of Christ. And this has usually been seen as conferring to a priest the exclusive power to make Christ present in the Eucharist and to forgive sins. Spirituality seized upon this theological stricture on priesthood and pushed it further. A priest who can act in the person of Christ, in persona Christi as it is said in Latin, should be seen as another Christ, alter Christus, be revered as such, inspire a unique form of recognition and deference. This attitude is all the more difficult to overcome because it is vehiculated through usually soapy devotional exhortations, and even in magisterial pronouncements it is less affirmed than suggested, and has somehow shaped Catholic imagination at a deep subconscious level. The priest as another Christ is not a theological expression. It appears sporadically and yet with remarkable regularity in the official teaching of the Church. It is deliberately absent from the documents of the Second Vatican Council, and significantly it was absent also in the documents of the Council of Trent, and yet remains pervasive in the devotional and exhortative literature concerning priesthood. As we know, the formula in persona Christi is deployed in the argument against the ordination of women in the Roman Declaration Inter Insignores of 1976. As if Vatican II had not said anything on the subject, priesthood is approached again in terms of power. The power of pronouncing the words of consecration of the Eucharist are again put in this document on the forefront as the defining aspect of the representation of Christ by the priest. According to the authors of this document, the representation of Christ in the celebration of the Eucharist assumes an altogether distinctive form. Not only the priest alone is credited with the effective power to perform it, but when he pronounces the words of consecration, he, the document says, acts in persona Christi, taking the role of Christ to the point of being his very image. The priest performs this role because he alone is capable, according to the document, of being in the image of Christ in ways that are perceptible and recognizable with ease, that is, because he is male. The idea of the priest being an alter Christus, another Christ, is not mentioned explicitly, but it looms large in the background of this crude, naturalistic approach to priestly representation. The whole sacramental economy, the document says, is based upon natural signs, on symbols imprinted on the human psychology. Therefore, the same natural resemblance is required for persons as for things. Since Christ was and remains a man, the document says, there would not be this natural resemblance which must exist between Christ and his minister if the role of Christ were not taken by a man. Now, this approach to priesthood in terms of power and this understanding of priestly representation contradicts the way in which the most important dogmatic document of the Second Vatican Council, Lumen Gentium, interprets the relation between the Church and hence ordained ministry and Christ. According to Lumen Gentium, only Christ, properly speaking, is the sign and the instrument of God's action. Institutions and ministers can represent Christ only to the extent in which the whole body, not just the priests, make Christ visible, not through power, but through active love. As Jesus says in the Gospel of John, by this, and this only, people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. The key message of Lumen Gentium is that no other Christ, alter Christus, is needed. Christ is truly present and visible in his church, insofar as this church as a whole embodies that of which the Eucharist is the symbol, that is, communion, that is, a world reshaped in the image of the life of the Trinity. The key lesson of Lumen Gentium is that if the Church cannot be called another Christ, much less so can priests. And this nullifies the whole argument of Inter Insignores against the ordination of women. Let me say it clearly. There is no valid theological argument that justifies the refusal of the ordination of women in the Catholic Church. There is just a flawed pseudo-theological narrative which has permeated Catholic spirituality and which is the main culprit of what Pope Francis calls the scourge of clericalism. The cause of the ordination of women and overcoming clericalism are one and the same.